Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, Pat and I will be doing a full overview of our latest Airsoft event, Operation Last Refuge 2. We've been talking about this game for a while, and it finally happened on May 27th, 2023, so a couple of weeks ago. And we thought we'd give you a breakdown of the game from our perspective as organizers and also semi-participants. And then talk about some of the things we thought went well, as well as some of the areas of opportunity to improve on for next time, because that's, it's something that we talk about all the time. It's like, yeah, it's great that you're great, but also how do you get better, right? So
what can we tinker with?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. That being said, the feedback from the players has been really good. We did an anonymous poll and survey form basically to gather some feedback, really good feedback there, very positive, and a couple of good things for us to work on. As a quick review, Operation Last Refuge 2 was a 6-hour continuous play event. So we had two teams competing to collect basically victory points by completing missions, holding the field, negotiating with the third faction, yada, yada, yada. But fundamentally, it was really centered around the core gameplay of just trying to control the field, and then the core roleplay aspect of role-playing with this third faction of neutral villagers that was role-played by game staff, which is, in this case turned out to be all the Storm Riders. So we prepared the field as well to be slightly different. We'll talk about that in a second, because we wanted the players to have a different experience on the field than they typically would at an open game. And there's a few things that we did. And then we also included a lot of different mechanics for them to utilize, exploit, both through strategy and role playing. And I really do think that overall the day went very well, and both teams played, really competitively. At the end of the day, the score was very close. It was 2 points in the difference, 15-13. Yeah, I think for players who were experiencing this type of game for the very first time, with the exception of a few people who've played larger games, it was extremely well received, and players really did engage as much as we could have really expected. So I'm excited to talk to Pat about it, and get his perspectives too, because we talked about this before in some of the lead ups. Like, I did the logistics of running the game and the core missions for the commanders, talking to the commanders over the radio to issue them their missions and orders and so on, as well as liaising with the actual field owner. Well, not the field owner, but in this case, the field manager, to make sure that they were staffed and everything was going well. They were, the waivers were being signed, and all the adult stuff. So while I was doing that, Pat was running all the role play stuff in the village, assigning roles like we've talked about before. And so our perspectives, the day went by like in a whirlwind, but that's sort of beside the point.
Definitely.
But our perspectives were different. Like, we saw different things throughout the day. So I'm excited to talk about that as well. So I think where maybe we can begin is sort of at the beginning, which is kind of stupid to say, but and that really would be the chrono the night before. So the night before the event, what we decided to do, so the event was on Saturday morning, starting at 9 a.m. sharp, or that was the plan. And so we wanted to have the opportunity for players to come the night before to attend a safety brief, and to chrono their guns so that they could basically head onto the field right away the next morning. They wouldn't have to attend the safety brief, and that would, minimize the time that they needed to get prepared. And I know that that's what a lot of larger games in other areas tend to do. So we're like, hey, well, we're not any better or worse than anybody else, so let's give that a shot. And unfortunately, though, not many people attended that briefing. We had about a dozen people attend, which actually kind of just basically slowed us down the next day. That being said, we had a great time. I think in future, I was talking to Mike, the field manager, about this. And maybe in future we'll make it a bit more of an event. Like, we might do a barbecue, or we might do a raffle or something to get people to get out there for another reason, other than just attending the brief, and to chrono their guns. That way, we really get as many people out there as possible the night before.
I think there was still value to it in that we got to have a chat with a lot of the people
Yes.
who did go out. One of the big positives for me, like regardless of the number of players who came out, was that a lot of the players who did come out were sort of the more experienced players and players who we needed to take sort of a senior role, like leading the day in terms of
Hmm.
organization stuff on the players on the team side, and that did, I think, work mostly okay.
Yeah, I would agree. And it was, I mean, it was Rob and his crew were there for sure. And it was good for them to be there, like you said, because they, they have that sort of seniority and they'd be rolling with players who are much younger or much newer to the sport. And so they would need, that they would need to work with them. So that was certainly one thing. And we had lots of really good questions too. Like people who were there had an opportunity to ask questions in a, let's call it a smaller forum. We had more time. We were less rushed. And
Yep.
some of the questions were really good. And there was some stuff that came up that I hadn't considered. Like we were using candy for the painkiller game mechanic. And like, I'd never considered, well, what if the player trying to take those painkillers is diabetic? Never even crossed my mind,
Yep.
but that's totally valid. And I was like, oh well, I mean, in that case you probably should not take the painkillers, I guess. Or I mean, you do you, like, what your healthcare routine is, so you figure it out. And if you tell me, hey, I can't eat these, I'm just going to dump them out or give them to my buddy because I'm diabetic, yeah, that's fine, dude. Like, I'm not going to be like, no, you must take them and then do a shot of insulin after. Like, obviously that's not,
Yeah, that's
so,
not quite the goal.
but it, I would never have realized that maybe until the next day, when we had the proper safety brief, unless someone had asked a question, right? So that was one thing. The other thing too, I think, is we had those tamper proof stickers, which were intended to like basically seal the airsoft replica bodies up to make sure that people didn't tamper with them, which conceptually works fine. The problem is that the tamper proof stickers that I got specifically because I didn't want them to leave a residue on the gun. Because a lot of these void stickers, the way that they work is that you put them over, and when you take them off, it leaves an imprint saying void on the actual material, right? Which
Okay.
is fine if it's like a computer case or something like that, or what have you, where it's like it's owned by a business or whatever. But in this case, it's owned by players who, probably don't want their guns to be marked up with that kind of stuff. So, and it will leave it regardless, because eventually you're going to take it off, right? And when you do that, the marking will be on there. So I was like, that's not appealing to me. I want one that doesn't leave a residue. And so I was able to find them, and they absolutely do not leave a residue by virtue of the fact that they also don't stick very well.
I was
So
waiting for that.
that was kind of a bummer. Like, it's like you put it on there and then you could just basically peel it off, and it didn't actually show any evidence of tampering because it didn't really adhere to the metal body. We also tried it on the like the wood hand grips on like AKs and stuff. Same sort of deal. It works really well on paper. It works really well on cardboard. It works really well on like plastic. But metal bodies, wood stuff, no go. Glass, also no go. Like, I mean, not that we would try it on glass, but I tried it at home on glass and it also didn't work. So, anyways, all that said, like, I think in future we might want to look at a different solution. There's lots of other solutions out there. It's just this one didn't work. So they were basically useless. Aside from that, I think the night before also gave us an opportunity to go and inspect the field conditions, because after a winter that like we had, it wasn't sure what the field conditions would be like, right? And actually, it was better than last year, I would say. Like, I know for a fact that Mike put more work into the field after the winter than he had the opportunity to do last year, and so as a consequence,
That's
like, that part was fine.
so that's one of my one of my first like points to think about actually, in terms of the next time we do this. And like I'm making the assumption, I guess, that we're going to do this again, but like we had fun
Oh, that
and
we definitely will, yeah.
people have expressed interest. So I think that in future we should think about posting the season opener in early June,
Hmm.
because Mike had articulated that like having a few more days would have been helpful, like having some more time to get stuff up and running after the winter. And um, just winter's always going to put, a burden of attrition on the field. And so like I think that we can have games before the official season opener fine, and that maybe we should have waited a little longer. But I mostly think that because it would make things easier on getting the field prepped. and
Yeah.
like squared away to go. Like I don't think it posed a big issue for us this time, just a thing to think about as we go on.
Yeah, and it's hard to know. I mean, people, listeners might not realize, but the weather in Newfoundland is very unpredictable. It's very fickle,
It snowed
and
last week. Like
yeah. So, like, realistically speaking, if 2023 were 2022, we would have been completely fine to have our like season opener game on May 27th, because this time last year we had several weeks of really good weather
that was
leading
fantastic.
up to the end of May. But now, today, as a time of recording, it is June 4th, and the high temperature today was 6 degrees. Like, it's been absolute rubbish, and it's been like this for months. So that makes it very hard for the field
It,
manager to get out there and like do what they need to do on the field
it's
when
June
the weather
4th,
is just
and I
garbage.
just want to emphasize this: it snowed on June 1st. Like
Yeah.
so,
So,
weather here is
yeah.
pretty variable, and like I think um again, like it just might make it easier on him. Um, but in terms of our setup stuff, it went really well.
Yeah, and it was dry enough that we could go out and like start putting up cardboard and stuff the night before, because one of the things we wanted to make sure we did was to board up certain windows or like certain entryways and stuff that really gave you a point of domination, because we didn't want the team that started closer to the village to be able to just eventually utilize that as a second base and just be able to just defend that all day. Because we've said it, I think, in the podcast before, like, if you put us in that village and tell us to hold it, we can hold that all day long, right? Because it's so well defended and there's so many good vantage points. So we wanted to make sure that we boarded them up. So the night before, we had all kinds of cardboard that Chris was able to provide to us from his work, and Jason had just bought a house, so he's moving. He had all kinds of moving boxes, so we had so much cardboard to put up, which was great. We just needed time to do that. And so, having, if we had to do all of that the morning of, I think that would have been really dicey. So being able to do it the night before really alleviated the amount of lifting we had to do the next day.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That part of things went super well. It was very, just useful. It was also good to get us some time on the field to like wander around and have a look at the state of things.
Yeah.
Um, it didn't really turn out that we needed to make any last minute changes, but the time to put stuff up was tremendously useful. I mean, one of our big goals was to just sort of in that urban, air quotes, urban area of the
Hmm.
field to block as many like lines of fire through windows and stuff as possible,
Yeah.
just to make it much, much more of an obstruction and much less of a useful defensible position.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that takes us really to the next day. Like, I mean, I know we were out there for a couple hours. I had left a little early, but I know you guys weren't there much longer after I left.
No,
Um,
wasn't terrible.
Yeah, the next morning, the morning of the event, that was the part that was a little bit dicey for me. Mostly because, so the game was starting at 9, right? The intent was for me to blow the whistle, or for the game staff, whatever, to blow the whistle at 9 a.m. And players were told the game whistle will blow at 9, whether you are on the field or not. And so, we spent the morning being extremely rushed. I showed up 7:15. Mike, the outdoor manager, wasn't even there. Some of the buildings were locked up, so we couldn't get our stuff, but that's okay. Like, we had other stuff that we could do, so that was fine. We sort of, got
Yeah,
moving
it,
stuff to
it
the
was still
field.
useful
And
time.
yeah, totally. The challenge was that most players did not start showing up until like 8:30, right? So when I started the safety briefing at 8:30, players were still showing up, which meant that I had to repeat myself a few times. And some of them just flat out missed the information, and they didn't realize that they had missed something later on in the day when they had to get that information from a teammate or from their commander, or even just ask game staff for some details like, hey, I don't understand this, right? At one point, I know that there was some player who asked me, it's like, I just saw someone doing something with like a case, like a villager. What do I do with that? I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, it's role playing. You do what you think you should do, right? So, like, a lot
Yeah,
of that message got a little bit muddled.
yeah. I mean, the issue I think there is, I won't say entirely, but like a large proportion of the players who are currently playing are on the younger side, like, and I don't mean kids, but like, teenagers. And they don't necessarily have their own way to get to the field. But also, like,
Hmm.
a lot of the adult players were also slow getting out there. Um, and I think people are really like, I think this is a local thing, but it might be a global thing. I'm sure the Discord will tell me when we're done.
Hmm.
Um, and I look forward to it. But we have a fairly solid, like, whenever I show up kind of mentality.
Yes.
Like, and that's a thing that Frontline's approach to running events has definitely encouraged.
Well, to
Um,
be fair, they haven't really organized an event of this nature for most of these players. Like
oh, yeah,
they've
totally.
never
I
experienced
just meant
it.
that, like,
Yeah.
to clarify, I meant more that, like, if you show up late for a airsoft Saturday afternoon, like a Saturday day airsoft game, whatever,
Yeah.
you will have missed some play, but you won't have missed anything of mechanical significance.
Yeah.
And that's pretty relevant to, I think, people's approach here. So that might be improved just by the fact that we've done one now.
That's what I'm thinking. And it's also like you don't know what you don't know. Like I remember the first time I signed up for like a road race as an example, right? I had never done one before. So like they tell you, "Hey, you have to show up and you have to be like on the start line like 30 minutes before the start of the race and you absolutely can't wear headphones. It's not allowed." And then when you do your first one, you realize that yes, these are all like the rules and stuff like that, but like you understand what the dynamic actually is and you organize yourself in consequence, right? On the flip side, you have people who don't listen at all and they just do whatever, and then they show up and they're completely disorganized, and that happens at those kinds of events too. And then once you've done it once, then you understand which are the important bits for you and which are the ones that aren't. So I know now when I do a race, like I don't want to be at the start line for the first half an hour. I want to be warming up and doing all this other kind of stuff. Other people want to be there for half an hour because they want to meet people and chat and listen to the announcements and the thank yous and the anthems and all this. Like, don't care. Some people just like will show up 5 minutes and they're there for the gun and off they go, right? So similarly here, now they've experienced or players have experienced this. So they know it's like, oh no, I really do need to be there at least an hour, right? I don't need to be there at 7, but half an hour is not going to cut it,
Yep.
right?
And I think
So
that,
that's a big part of it, right?
yeah, and I think that um, we probably can do a better job of, like, streamlining their arrival into our organizational
Agree.
process next time.
Yeah.
And like, that's a thing that really, to be honest, I didn't think about constructively until after it was already on the go. And I was like, oh, yeah, we should have done some stuff differently here. But that's not a big thing to change. Um, Mostly, I think that in a lot of ways it would be better for us to keep the paying frontline portion of event registration and the our information keeping more separate. Because just, having someone come up to us and sign in and going, okay, we know what team you're on, go there, from us, like having that organized by us and directed from us, would allow us better control of the flow of that.
Yeah,
um
or I mean, and there's other solutions too. Like I was talking to Mike on Saturday about this, and he was saying like I could also like in future we could give you a list whereby if someone is not a renter but they've bought something like they've bought BBs or they've bought like a smoke grenade or whatever, all that is prepared for you ahead of time. And so it's like race kit pickup again for road races where they show up and they're like, "What is your name?" And they look for your name and the
Here's
registration,
your box of
and it
stuff.
shows them like here is, and they're like, here is your bag, here is your shirt, oh, you paid for a premium shirt, here is your premium shirt, here is your whatever, right? And so in the same way, people would show up and be like, okay, what is your name? Oh, your name is John Smith. Okay, John Smith. All right, you are John Smith number 3, and John Smith number 3 is on red team. Here is your red armband, here is your bandage, here is your playing card. Do you have anything ordered? No. Okay, go over there to get chronoed when you're ready, and then off you go. And just going through it that way. Or, saying like, oh, John Smith number 2, you're on blue team, here's your stuff. Also, it looks like you paid for a smoke grenade and a bag of BBs. Here you go. And if you need to get chronoed, you go there. Or if it's a rental, okay, now you can go pick up your rental and your mask at the store, at the counter or whatever that is. And I think in streamlining that process, but again, that's something that players need to be aware of, like, and we can do an easier job by making sure that we have like a sign that says like registration desk or something, and people come and do that. So I think that portion ultimately is, it was a bit of a slowdown for us on the morning of, but ultimately the reason that the game did not start on time, we had to delay it by 15 minutes, was because players were not prepared and on the field at 9. And it's not because they were waiting for us. Like, yeah, there were a couple players who were waiting for armbands and stuff, but most of the players who were not on the field, they were still at their vehicle, like loading their
Yeah,
mags.
that
They were
was
still preparing their guns and all
that
this
was a
kind of stuff,
factor
which,
of player preparedness, not a
and
factor
some
of
of those
stuff that we
players
messed up
attended the
mostly.
briefing the night before, right? Which to me is perplexing. Like, you had even more time today because you didn't have to attend the safety brief. You didn't have to get your gun chronoed. Everything was done ahead of time. All you have to do is show up and walk on the field. And so when 9 o'clock rolled around and we were considering starting the game, at the time, there were only about like eight blue players on the field and like four red players or something. And at 9:15, when we delayed 15 minutes, there were only two more red players, I think, and about 12 blue players,
Yeah.
which,
So the red
yeah,
players, naturally that naturally resulted in the red players spending the beginning of the game in really rough straits because it's just like, well, the there's 50% of us relative to the number of enemy combatants.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you know, so it was I'm going to say problematic.
Yeah, and Blue
uh,
did a really good job of pushing down the field very, very hard. So
oh man, they
at
were
basically, yeah, they were basically more than halfway. I'd say three-quarters of the way down the field by the time 9:30 rolled around or whatever. They had
all right.
control of all three control points.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, by like 9:20, they had control of all three control points.
Yeah,
Blue pushed really, really aggressively. And I think part of that is that they looked at the situation and went, we have them hugely outnumbered. Let's make the benefit of this. So
yeah,
they played that in a very intelligent way. And I think Red, kudos to the Red players who were on the field at the time because they did their level best to stop it from being a thing. Um, you know, it's just, yeah, double the number of guys is a big thing.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I think that needs to be tinkered with in a like we need to address either as you said, sort of like having the setup situation be whether it's us or frontline staff or some combination of the two going like checking people's teams and getting them sorted at the beginning of the day. I think maybe if I think we need to have a failsafe built in the next time we do this, such that there's if there is a critical mass of players or isn't a critical mass of players at start time, we can adjust it on the fly more easily.
hmm
In the sense that like allowing the game to start with a 6-on-12 situation, no matter how much we want to be like, well, we gave you all the information you needed, you should have done the thing, is problematic. Like it's how we built the scenario, and I don't think
yeah.
we screwed it up in that way. I just think it's a thing to think about for next time in terms of like maybe we set it so that like the game doesn't start until there are 10 players on both sides or something.
Well, I mean, maybe. I think I'm a very big proponent of I want to reward people who are organized, right? So if you show up on time and you take to the field and you plan, like you should be rewarded for that in a meaningful way. And if both teams do it, then they both get the same benefit. But I also I agree, like we can't start it so that it's like, oh well, I've got four people and they've got 12 or 20 or whatever. But I think my approach for next time will certainly be to obviously make sure that we're more streamlined in sort of the registration process. But also, I think telling people like who are in the parking lot, it's like, hey, just so you know, like the game is starting in 10 minutes, right? And I was extremely busy that day at that morning. And so I didn't really have an opportunity to go and like tell people, hey, just so you know, like we're going to blow the whistle now and you're not on the field. So your team's going to need you, right?
So one of the things that I think
Yeah.
is also a big takeaway from the whole thing is we needed to A, distribute our staff better, and B, we actually needed some more people. First in terms of the distribution, like because we had most of the on-field stuff done, we had 3 or 4 people largely idling for the first while
Yeah.
you were doing that, and like having us up front organizing stuff would have been pretty good. And I think really we
Agree.
need to
Yeah.
have the setup done the night before completely,
Yeah.
or as much as
Or as much
completely as
as we
possible.
can. Yeah.
and then have most of our guys, or at least enough of our guys, up front helping, and then get them onto the field with sort of a like, all right, so the majority of you are going to go down 5 minutes before and get squared away. Then we're going to blow the whistle 5 minutes later or
Yeah,
10 minutes
I
later, kind
agree.
of thing. Um,
Yeah, because it was really just me and Kirby was doing a great job doing getting everyone through chrono and like keeping me up to date. But like I was operating under the obviously mistaken assumption that all the villagers and village staff were like basically flat out getting stuff ready and stuff until the last minute. And
and the
so,
reality is, like,
it's
we got there at 7:30, so most of the prep we
yeah,
needed to do was done by 8.
yeah. So I
Um,
mean, those kinds of things aside, I think we definitely have a little bit of a bit better coordination to do. But
yep.
ultimately, that was the small potatoes of it because by 10 o'clock that day, um, the game was in full swing. Like almost all of the players who were going to show up, minus a couple of stragglers, um, who showed up paradoxically like way later in the day, but like what are you even doing? But it's beside the point. By 10 a.m., most of the players who were going to be on the field were there. The game had balanced out in terms of the fighting force size, let's call it the team size. But the first sit rep that I called for in gameplay terms of sit rep was me calling the commanders and getting them to tell me what control points they actually hold on the field.
What
And
are
when
you
I
doing
called,
currently?
what's that?
What are
Say
you
again?
doing currently?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Um, when I called, so the blue team's commander was Nova, so I called Nova and I was like, "Hey, what's your sit rep?" He's like, "We control all three control points." I'm like, "All right, well, that's great." And so, and I called Chief, the commander for Red, and he was like, "No, we don't control anything right now." So then, at that point, we're thinking, okay, so what is Red going to be able to do to get themselves out of the hole sort of that they're in, and how are they going to
How,
fight back, right?
yeah, how can they adjust this situation?
So I gave them both a mission, although I had challenges with Rob's radio for a little bit because for some reason he kept changing the channel and I kept losing him. So I physically walked over and I gave him this mission. But I said, hey, you need to recon the village, you need to make friendly contact with the villagers, etc. And because of the radio issues, again, Red was sort of delayed in getting that done. The blue team was the first one to make contact, and so they were earning by the first like in the first like hour of the game, like Red was leading like 4-0, something like that.
And like from a concurrent thing, right? Like I had the timetable that Phil was using for the objectives and the mission calls and stuff. And so for the first hour of the game, I was like, well, Blue's doing a lot to make my village and I friendly. Red is not talking to us. That seems weird.
Hmm.
Hey, Phil, why is Red not talking to us? They're supposed to be.
Yeah, and again, like one of the things we had made very clear for the commanders is when we give you missions, you do not have to do them. Right?
Yep.
It is up to you to determine if you want to play the mission or not. And so
You don't have to talk
my
to me.
well, exactly. And so my expectation right off the gate was, oh, well, Rob has decided not to do this mission. Turns out he had not heard the mission because his radio, we were having issues with the radio. And once I gave him the mission, then he started talking to the villagers, but that didn't happen until a little bit later. So comms issues there. But at that time, we basically said, okay, well, the way that we had designed the game is that, one team that was having the better luck on the field or that had more control of the field would get one mission, and then the other team would get another different mission that would ideally help either motivate the team to do the thing that will help them get control of the field, or will push them sort of in the right direction or something like that. And conversely,
Yeah, so the
there might be a mission that you definitely don't want to do, which is the mission that we ended up giving to Blue.
yep. So like the add to that, the village, RP and game staff were also a lever we could use to try to like adjust gameplay stuff. So, in a really realistic way, Red was in a terrible situation for a lot of the first hour of the game just because of the weight of players
Hmm.
that had, that they'd had to deal with. So, in the village, we um, encouraged them to bribe us to let them like sneak through the village and provide alternate zones of fire and stuff like that. Because one of the utilitarian things here to keep in mind is a huge number of these players haven't done anything like this before.
Hmm.
And so, um, in some cases, I don't think they had thought that, oh, yeah, we can just like go bribe people to let us do stuff. and bribe
Yeah.
in this case is with in-game currency, not actual money. Although I gotta say, once they figured it out, one of the red players did offer us literal money to let him do stuff, and we were like, "No, it has to be in-game currency." But like, thanks.
Yeah. Keep your money, thank
um,
you.
and that same player, just because it's funny, uh, sold us one of his teammates for an hour because he ran out of money and wanted to do something, and was like, "If I just give this guy to be your like personal assistant and carry your stuff for the next hour, will you let me do the thing?" And we were like, "Sure."
That seems
Like,
completely reasonable. Indentured servitude.
yeah,
Let's go.
like this seems in no way evil. Why not?
Yeah. And so like that's the kind of the role playing that I really didn't get to witness at all from the relative safety of my admin bunker and or walking around the field. Although I did hear a lot of role playing in the form of Jeremy shouting in his pseudo Slavic accent, whatever it was, at role players throughout the day. To be honest, like not just at the start,
Oh
but
man.
what were the original, because I didn't get to witness these at all, like what were the initial contacts with the players like what was that like?
So it was a little bit mixed. The blue team's initial contact with us was, so I you know the talking about takeaways for me. So I did the sort of like mini werewolf game that we talked about,
Yeah.
and assigned a bunch of roles to the players. I dealt them randomly, and they were just like taking a page from like D&D, just like, okay, so 3 bullet points worth of role playing notes. Here's your character, go.
Hmm.
And so uh, Steph was on the air quotes gate on the entrance to the village on the blue side, and had gotten the, "You have done a few too many of these interesting, you have tested a few too many of the local drugs
Right.
of the narcotics." And so he was just like, his role playing notes were basically, "You're a little crazy, lean into it, but like not in a bad way." And so he did a lot of pulling guns on people and shouting for the first 25 minutes of the day. I think part of that was that like he was sleepy and cranky, but it worked out really well.
Mhm.
um, so yeah, the first first interactions with the blue team were sort of like positive, punctuated by moments of tension as several people held guns on one another. And eventually they brought one of them in to talk to me, and the person who was doing that was sort of like, I think, expecting me to be a helpful NPC off the cuff. Like, I
Mhm.
think he was expecting that when he came and spoke to me, he would get like helpful dialogue options instead of like, "Why are you here? What are you
Yeah.
doing in my village? Why are you invading my homeland?" Um,
Yeah.
and so like that threw him for a bit of a loop, I think, but it was fun. Jeremy was literally, his card was random villager, be helpful to Pat, be unhelpful to both, to the two teams, and he definitely lived up to that throughout the day.
Yeah.
Just
I
being like,
one of the moments I caught on
just
camera
license to
is,
troll.
yeah, I was walking back. I had just I think I just talked to Mike about like the food delivery or whatever, and I was walking back to the village, and he's just there shouting at some of the blue players, saying that they were very disrespectful to them, and he's not going to let them anywhere near the village until they apologize to him in a proper manner for using bad language or something like that. And I was like, oh my god! And so I'm just trying to be like deadpan and not pay attention, and I managed it all the way till I got to the inside of the admin bunker, and I just lost it. I'm like, this is the funniest thing I've seen
So
in
that's
months.
especially good because I remember that particular situation, and like the people he was yelling at had come up to talk to us and had drawn a gun on Steph because Steph was being crazy intentionally.
Mhm.
And that was the disrespect that he was talking about. And Jason and I had both been like standing there and had left because we couldn't keep our shit together. Like we were
Yeah,
behind a nearby building, like trying not to
just like
fall over
laughing.
laughing. um, just
But it's funny
absolutely
because
10 out
like
of 10.
that moment actually came out of me giving a mission to Blue, where in order again for us to balance the battlefield a bit more, I gave Blue a mission to relocate some of their forces to the village because command thought it was a good idea to do that to help the villagers to win their hearts and minds, so to speak. But from a role playing standpoint, we knew that the villagers did not want one team to come and bring a force of players to win hearts and minds. They would see that as very aggressive. So the game went from like, oh, we like the blue side, to, oh, they just tried to send a bunch of guys to our village with guns.
It's
So
like,
now
move
we
in.
don't like them very much
Yeah.
anymore,
I
right?
do not like you at all. Please leave.
Yeah.
Um,
And so that reset it, and that was great because at that time, on the same time, we're saying to Red, it's like, hey, you have to go try and take a control point. Also, there's a downed UAV somewhere in the area, which was just like a briefcase or whatever. But if you take a control point in the next half an hour, we'll give you a bonus point. And if you find the UAV, you also get a point. So they could swing the score by going and completing those objectives, in a sort of a timely fashion or whatever, which they were able to do and get a bunch of points. But that still didn't give them full control of the field, and Blue would still have been in a really dominant position if they had whatever they had left on the field, as well as a completely positive reaction with the villagers. Unfortunately, the commander decided to do that mission instead of going like, hey, hang on, wait a minute. Based on all the interactions that I've had with the villagers, I don't think they will appreciate if I send a force of guys there, right?
yep.
And so that would ultimately set up sort of a neutral footing engagement and like village feast where you and the commanders had a bit of a chit chat about
Yes.
future prospects in
Yeah.
the region.
Yeah. We ordered pizza and made the two commanders walk down to the village and turn off their microphones and get off their radios to have a feast with us and talk about the future in the region and their plans for the village.
Did you find that they stayed sort of quote unquote like in character and like respected the game, or
I think that
were you interacting? Yeah.
in a lot of ways, that particular bit was more shooting the shit.
Okay.
um, but at the same time, like, it was positive in that everyone was like, yeah, we're having a really good time. This is really fun. And there was sort of a, like, both commanders made an effort to talk to me privately, during it about like what they could do to get us on side.
Mhm.
But at that point in the day, the answer was really sort of like, well, if you could stop shooting people who live here, that would be great.
Yeah, totally.
And that wasn't terrible. It's one of those things where it's like, all right, maybe we can tinker, like, for me, maybe we can tinker with sort of like how rep and interaction with the village works next time. But like, I don't think it went terribly. I will say, like, I do have sort of like two big things Pat definitely will adjust next time. So the first one is that, like, the amount of effort I put into figuring out role playing stuff and like designing a role playing situation was vastly more than it needed to be, because
Mhm.
most of the players just didn't engage with it.
Yeah.
Or we had to go out and sort of drag them into it. And I don't have any problem with that, right? Like, going out and dragging them into it was expected, right?
Yeah.
We knew that was going to be the thing we needed to do. But I think that, like, they, at no point did they really interact with the sort of like air quotes mini game of werewolf that I designed for them.
Yeah,
And I think that
absolutely.
really, given that there was a point where, like, we had the guy who was the doctor in a lab coat wandering around, and both teams just sort of let him do his thing intermittently. It was like, all right, maybe we need to be a bit more direct about this next time.
And I think that sort of like it's the old like D&D role playing trope. Like, you, as a game master, you put all this effort into this one thing, and your players just totally bypass it. I think,
Yes.
though, on the flip side, I would say if and when we do something like this again, it won't be exactly the same, but I think people will know a bit more what to expect from a role play standpoint.
Yep.
So you might actually do fine. But I mean, there were things that, like, we really had to be, I think, very explicit in certain cases where just to get players to pick up on it. And the one that stands out to me was that the blue team radios me as game control, and they're like, Sunray, this is Nova. We have control of the villagers' scientist. This is very early in the game, and like at that point, that whole werewolf minigame, like it was very unlikely to me that they would actually have the scientist. It's possible, but I'm like, all right, interrogate him and figure it out. And while they're doing that, I'm checking with you to see what's going on. And you're like, oh, they've got Matt. Matt is the village idiot. And I was like, oh,
So to clarify,
um,
because I'm a little proud of how this one went. This one was what we call emergent gameplay in a good sense.
yeah,
So we're trying to figure out like what we can do to sort of get the 6 red guys. This is like beginning of the game to get the 6 red guys who are playing against 12 blue players some help.
mhm.
um, and Matt has the village idiot card and is like, so how about I just like go wander around over behind their lines? I'm like, sure. He's like, cool. I brought a lab coat. Can I put that on and just like see what they do? And I'm like, that does sound like a thing an idiot would do. Yes. Put on a lab coat and wander in the woods is definitely, in line with village idiot. And like his role-playing notes were basically, you are the village idiot. You can't spell doctor. If they ask you who the doctor is or where the doctor is, you don't understand that word.
Yeah,
And so when at the time they were messaging Phil and like being like, yeah, we think we have the doctor, there were 8 of them talking to the village idiot going, are you the
yeah.
doctor? And the village idiot was just going, no hablo inglés.
Yeah, it was very it was so it was really it was very obvious that, I mean, once they started talking to him, they're like, I'm like, interrogate him, find out what you can. And they were very confused by that. It was very obvious to me because once they started, they're like, yeah, we're pretty sure we have the village idiot, or I'm pretty sure we have the scientist, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, all right, stand by for like, further orders or whatever. And so I started walking around the village without my game staff stuff on as a villager, just shouting, where's my idiot? Where's my idiot? And I did that for like, 3 or 4 times.
And then one of the
And
blue
then
players,
someone on the blue team clued in and started calling on the radio. And because they were on my comms, I could hear them. They're like, yeah, guys, I think we got the village idiot. I don't think that guy's the scientist.
yeah, it's just,
And then, like,
I think we've screwed up.
yeah, but like it took a while for them to figure that
Amazing.
out. And again, it's not because any of them are like, are unintelligent or anything like that. That's not at all what I'm trying to get at. It's just in the heat of the moment, having never experienced anything like this before, totally forgivable,
Right.
right? You don't even realize that
And
that could be part of it, right?
and I think it was like it's funny because they didn't. No one, at least that I'm aware of, has given us any feedback that that was a negative thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like if anyone has, then I guess the sentence becomes less useful. But people had fun with it. People found it, entertaining. And yes, okay, weird. And like, oh, what? But like, it's the kind of thing that creates stories for people to tell after, right? And
Absolutely.
so
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
for me, if you run a pen and paper RPG game and people afterwards are like telling their friends about, the cool thing that happened, or more often, and frankly, it is more often the silly, daft thing that happened, that's a win, right?
Yeah.
So people definitely were like, what? But I think in a positive way. Like it was a moment of deer in the headlights and then a moment of like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I think that, yeah, it's the literal note I have here is Pat didn't follow the core rule of design for this stuff, which is keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, and it's funny because I feel the same way as well from the strategic side, because what we were doing was creating a lot of opportunities for the teams to exploit the situations that were occurring on the field. So we gave Blue a mission to go and move people to the village. And the reason that we do that is because it's going to take people away from one area, which now gives Red an opportunity to attack, right? Or we give Red a mission to go look for something, and that gives Blue an opportunity to push when they see that Red forces are being redeployed. All of this is founded on the principle that both teams will have enough situational awareness to be aware that those things are occurring. And that did not happen. And that did not happen because most players on the team, the vast majority of players, did not have radios. On the blue team, I believe they had 5 radios between them in a team of like 20 players, right? And the commander did not necessarily set it up so that the players with radios were running a squad or a team, not necessarily, or at least not as far as I understood.
And that's
Uh, and so that's a that's a strategic decision that they needed to make. But because they haven't experienced this before, they didn't really know that they had to make it. And I think on the red team, they had even fewer radios than that.
Yeah, I was going
So
to say
that
that's the
makes it,
thing that we've
yeah,
learned as like a how to do this well as people running the teams.
yeah,
Um, you know, but I mean at the same time, we have um, you know something like 9 players operating currently, right? Like 9 people who, if we got everyone on our team at a game, we'd have 9 players, and several of them are flaky as hell about radios and always have been.
hmm,
And like even though we as a team are super aware of how critical they are to a lot of like practical operating as a larger group. So like I definitely get that. But in the hopes, frankly, that some of the folks who played are listening, yeah, this is why radios are a useful piece of kit. Get one. They're not super
yeah. And
expensive.
and to be honest, like, you don't need to be like super familiar with radio procedures. Although I will say, and Cal commented on the same thing, like, pretty good radio protocol overall by everyone who was using radios. Not like amazing. Like, there was one kid um on the blue team who was like literally shouting into the radio, number one, which is like no good, and giving very accurate information about how the enemy was over there or in the trees. Given that we played next to a forest, not very helpful. Which trees are you talking about, bud? Or over there, in reference to what? Like, and so I even heard one of the players say that back to him on the radio. He's like, "Oh, they're over there," and he's like, "We don't even know where you are." It's like, yeah, that's fair. But like, aside from that, like, it was very much like
The kid
very
was very excited. It
clear.
was good.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Like,
that's what's going to happen. But people were very clear generally. Like, when I was talking to the commanders, especially, like, it was like, this is my call sign, calling this call sign. I have a message, I have a question, I have a whatever. Okay, send me your traffic, or hey, hang on, wait a minute, or stand by, or whatever. And that was very helpful in terms of making sure that communication, when it did occur between the game staff, the headquarters, or whatever, Sunray as we called it, was clear and was being passed on and understood, relatively well. So that part was good from the radio standpoint. But there definitely is a need, I think, for number one, for more players to have radios, I would say, for these types of games. But number two, for commanders to really organize their teams based in squads with people who have radios. And I know that for some people who are listening to this who've played like larger games, like, it's like a no brainer. But the reality is, like, for a lot of players, like we said, they haven't experienced that before. So even the concept of saying, hey, you've got a radio, you take those 2 people with you. You've got a radio, you take these 4 people with you. Like, that's not something that necessarily they had thought about. And even on the red team as well, like, they had a bunch of experienced players with radios, and they were rolling together all day, and they were doing work, which is great. But their players who didn't have radios would have been disconnected from that, right? So those are the kinds of decisions in sort of the how you set up your team that may make or break the amount of situational awareness you have. Now, it's not like frontline is huge, but like, if something is going on at like the top end of the field and you're at the bottom, you're not going to see that. Like, yes, it's not a very big field, but
but
still.
it's still like, you know, if you're just walking end to end, it's still like 4 or 5 minutes.
Hmm.
If you're jogging it, it's 2. But like if you're trying to push up it under fire, it's 10. So yeah, like the better radio access your team has, the better your situational awareness becomes. And like
Absolutely, yeah.
we've definitely figured that out the hard way, to be honest, over time. Um, you know, so like, I don't fault the teams for not sort of having that as hammered down as we would have liked
No,
them to,
totally
or
not.
as
It's
they
not
might
a
have liked
fault. It's
to.
just a
It's
statement of
just a
fact.
like,
Yeah,
yeah, next time, you know.
yeah.
Um,
But it didn't stop them from still doing work. I think,
oh yeah, no, like
by
people played it very, very well.
yeah, and I think by like roughly the halfway point, the game had definitely evened out a lot. The game was much closer by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The score was almost tied, I think, at that point.
Yep.
And red was doing much better in the village because, as we were saying, the villagers didn't like the blue team as much because they had tried to move forces in the village. And so, from a narrative standpoint, you could say that, well, the villagers are now convinced that blue is there to invade their territory. So now they want red to help sort of support and defend. And so red got to set up a quote unquote embassy in the village in the 2-story structure. Now, it wasn't super useful as a domination point because most of the windows were boarded up, but it was still better than not having access to a 2-story
And
structure.
they were pretty smart about like knocking the boards out of the the boards, knocking the cardboard out of some of the windows, and like going, well, we're here, we might as well make ourselves at home. um, so that worked really well for them.
Yeah, did they actually knock down the cardboard? I don't think they did
Maybe
though,
we just didn't
because
have
we had told
cardboard
them no,
in at least one of the windows.
there was one window that didn't have cardboard,
Okay,
and then the other ones
so they
did.
were just
Because
using that
we
one.
told
My bad.
players not to knock down the cardboard, so they didn't definitely did that. They didn't do that. But there was one window, the back window, that, and they could stand. I know that on the back access ramp, like we had blocked that off and said you can't use that. I mean, you shouldn't because it's not safe
Yeah,
anyway. But that's beside the point. Um, but they were like shooting from the backside, however they could, which was great. Um, and it was helpful for them, but it wasn't game winning.
yeah, no,
I think
it
what
gave
we
them an
really,
advantage in places, but I don't think it like broke the game, air
yeah,
quotes.
where I think we really started to see the game shift is that by like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and then eventually by 3 o'clock, like players were tired,
Yep.
right? It's a 6-hour game. There haven't been any breaks. If you've been pushing hard, like the blue players were, you're pushing hard and then falling back, and then pushing hard and falling back, or going to your respawn and stuff, and coming right back in. Uh, by like 1 o'clock or by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the red team actually had basic most of the control of the field, and the blue players were boxed in, and they were really only fighting in one area, and the red had control of the rest of it. And so again, there's a situation where I walked. So the blue team paid for mercenaries from the village, right, to help bolster their ranks a little, which is good move.
Yep.
But then I walked over to the blue area, and I was talking to Cal, and I was talking very loudly in like an outdoor speaking voice, but very loudly, about how on my walk there through the section of the woods or whatever, I had not seen any enemy players. And boy, howdy, that's surprising. And if that were me, I would really be exploiting that and doing all of this out loud to see if they would actually do anything with that information, or even if they would even overhear it. And they chose not to. It still would have been hard because I think Red had a pretty good hold in talking to some of the other players. They had a pretty good hold on that, but still, part of it is of this type of game is you have to take the opportunities that are presented to you, and you also have to recognize them as opportunities, which I think
There,
there was a bit of a breakdown there sometimes,
and,
or at
and I mean,
times.
there was also a point in there, and like this is again, I think stems more from people not being used to it. But there was one in there where also like a bunch of the blue players were out in the parking lot reloading and like getting some like eating a sandwich.
Yep, and
And
that's gonna happen, right?
I mean, yes and no, right? In the sense that you like if you're playing in a 6 hour game that's going on for 6 hours, you should have a sandwich in your kit. You should have
Yes,
BBs to
agree.
reload in your kit, right? Like, um, and you should be ideally your commander should be rotating people so that it's like, oh, okay, like, you and you and you take 5, right?
Yeah.
But again, that's an experience commanding and an experience playing in this sort of thing, right? Um, so I do think that part of the reason that occurred was that the blue team was sort of like, we're go 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 go, and then they were like, oh, we didn't actually like bring our stuff. So one of the things maybe that we should sort of try to do with the afternoon briefing piece, I guess, if you will, is like, or the evening briefing beforehand piece is
Hmm.
giving people some time to like actually go on field and like set up their FOB in a slightly more um, blatant, effective, whatever way. Right. So like we brought tarps and hung them over the village in places, and like really we did that mostly for fun.
Yeah, that's right.
But like both teams had an FOB that was, on field but out of play functionally.
Yeah.
And people left their bag with their sandwich and their BBs and so on in the car. And it's like, well, okay, so
Bring them to the field. Yeah.
maybe, and I mean, maybe you and I, right? If we're talking about, doing something like this again in this, red on blue kind of context, maybe you and I should, spring for a red tarp and a blue tarp and put them up the night before and just be like, that's your FOB. You can store stuff there on field, right? You don't have to leave the play area to go to the
Yeah.
car to get your sandwich or your bottle of water or Gatorade or whatever. But
Part of it is
that's a,
yeah.
tinker with.
And part of it too is like, again, players don't know what to expect.
Totally.
And
I'm not being, or
I
well, I
think
mean, I am being critical.
No,
but
no, no,
hopefully
and I
constructively.
understand. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think we did everything we could to try and educate players about this game. We made a rules briefing video. We made like a teaser video, basically talking about like what they can expect. We did posts on posts on posts about how the day is going to go. What should you bring? Here are some tips and tricks. We did the rules briefing, but the night before, etc. And I think certainly some people heeded that advice, no question. But I think now players may, or I mean maybe they don't, and that's fine, whatever, but maybe they'll realize how important it is to pay attention to that information now.
I mean,
Like it makes the difference between being prepared and not. Like you're not at the mercy of how you feel, right? So if you're on the field and you're like, man, I'm getting tired, there are steps that you can take to put yourself back in the game. You know what you could do? You could go and you could eat 200 grams, or excuse me, 200 grams. You could eat 200 calories of mostly carbohydrates and sugar. And guess what? You're going to feel great, my man, in like 45 minutes.
yeah, well, I
right?
mean, like, there's a reason that I am routinely a protagonist of morale skittles.
Yeah, and like we had the painkillers that were sugar, which again, if you're diabetic, I apologize, but like
my bad.
For most players, that's a sugar hit, right? I went for a run today. I was out for an hour and 40 minutes. Guess what I had? I had 100 calories, and most of that was sugar. Do you know why? Because it's hard to keep going for 2 hours, basically, with no additional input. You need it. That's how humans work. And so if you know that about yourself, well, then you can take steps to prepare for that. However, these players, the vast majority of them, do not know. And they don't know because they've never experienced this before. So this is not an indictment, but these are the kinds of things that now many of these players should realize. The next time, hey, did you feel like you got your ass handed to you on that in terms of like your energy levels? Well, maybe you pack some Skittles. Maybe you pack some, I don't know, like an energy gel from the running room, like, some people take. Or maybe you just bring Gatorade with sugar, not the Gatorade Zero, but the actual sugar Gatorade, and you drink that. And that helps you, stay and get back, and whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I mean,
because you definitely don't want to slow down, because there's lots of players who I would see back, like back in the lines or whatever, and I'd just walk by them and be like, hey, get back in the fight, your team needs you, right? As a game staff or whatever, I'd be like, out of character, your team needs you. And they're like, yeah, we just need a couple more minutes, we're tired, we're reloading, whatever. I'm like, okay, cool, but like, you're skipping this respawn, right? It's like, yep, that's fine. So you're going to be waiting another 15 minutes. And then, some people were like, oh, the respawns were too long. Well, did you take an extra one? Because that would do it,
yeah,
right?
Were you waiting for too long because of luck or because of prep?
Well, yeah. But, without going negative, I think overall, by the time, 3:00 rolled around, people were good and tired, which is fine. Like, that's the whole idea. Like, if you weren't tired, you probably didn't work very hard. And I don't think any player was not tired. I think all of them were spent. They worked hard all day. And overall, I mean, I think it was the final score was, I think, 15-13 for red. So the red team did manage to come from behind victory, so to speak, because they had started the day so rough. Yeah. But ultimately it just was really good. One thing as well, and I haven't mentioned this, but like, when you're doing these kinds of events, like we had, like you had said, Pad, we had overthought certain things, like the code fragments portion, which ultimately didn't get used, the playing cards portion, like the capture cards and stuff, which ultimately could have worked fine, but it didn't for a variety of reasons, which I'm not going to get into. There's some improvements to make, but like one of the things that I noticed is how easy it is when you're in this role-playing space to be a disrupting influence, and to create those moments on the field with no prep. And I experienced that when I wore my rain suit as a mop suit with my gas mask and my helmet and my rocket launcher, and I just went on the field and pretended to bury something with a shovel and then run away. And then one of the other players grabbed me and I started shouting and screaming, and players came over and all this kind of stuff.
That's
And the
fun.
player who grabbed me is like one of the refs, and I know him. So like I was okay with him physically grabbing me because we had told players like you don't touch people, right? Like we don't want sort of that situation happening. But it's like it's Jeff, it's fine. Like I'm totally cool.
Don't
And so
actually
he
grab people,
grabbed me,
but like,
and
this is okay.
yeah, but like I said, like if you know the person and you have their consent, absolutely like fill your boots. If cue the meme. But if you don't know the person, then you shouldn't physically interact. But anyways, point is, Jeff grabs me and I start shouting and screaming, and he's like, "You're coming with me," etc. But then he's whispering to me, like, "What are we doing here?" Right? Like, how does this get resolved? And I was like, "I'm not coming with you. Like, I'm not gonna fight you, but I'm not coming with you." And then I'm shouting and shouting and shouting, and then he's shouting, and he's like, "So what happens?" It's like, "Well, we can push and shove around, and then you're eventually gonna have to like shoot me. You don't have to shoot me. You can just do bang bang or whatever, however it comes up." And he's like, "Okay, fine." So we scuffle for a while, and like draw a whole bunch of people around there, and then I start shouting, and he just goes bang bang, and I just fall over like limp dead or whatever.
And then the
And
villagers
like,
have to investigate a murder.
well, the villagers are like, "What's going on here?" And then the players are like, "Oh my god, what just happened?" And all this kind of
Everyone is
stuff. And they're like,
concerned.
"Is It was funny though, because one of the players was like, "Is he dead?" And someone else shouted, "No, he's still breathing." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm still alive. Like I'm out of character. I'm dead, but like I still gotta breathe, bro.
Sorry,
Like,
I
come
can't
on."
stop breathing on command.
And plus, I just been in a scuffle, so like I was out of breath. But anyways,
In a gas mask,
um,
like.
in a gas mask, and then so that situation, quote unquote, like resolves, and then I get up and I walk back to the admin zone, and Jeff is like, "What was that all about?" And I'm like, "Man, I have no idea." Like I do not like I just something I felt like doing, and you engage with it. We had this really cool moment, and ultimately it changed nothing about the game, but it changed a lot for the people who experienced that, right? Like
Yep.
it was a fun experience for them because people were asking, it's like, "Oh my god, what was that all about? We saw that guy and he got shot and he fell over," and it's like, "I don't know what to tell you. I'm just game staff,"
Yep.
right? But ultimately, that was just about nothing. It was much ado about nothing, I guess. But it was just an opportunity to create some of these moments that people will think back on and go, "Oh wow, that was a really fun experience." And that happened throughout the day. That's just the only one that I was, aside from the one of Jeremy shouting for excuses or apologies, I should say, the one that I witnessed, right? And there were many, many more.
And Jeremy shouting and demanding reparations.
Yeah. So those are the, and I mean, in talking to the players, like we did at the end of the game, we revealed that the red team won. Commiserations to the blue team, congratulations to everyone, all this kind of stuff. And the first thing people were asking was like, "When's the next one?"
Yep, which is
Right?
that's the outcome you want, right? When you
Yeah,
it has
totally.
to have gone somewhat okay. When people are like, "So can we do this again?"
Yeah, and without spoiling it, I think myself and Mike Keats were talking, and I think what we're gonna try and do from this point forward, at least for this year, we'll see how next year shapes up, but it's have a big game season opener and a big game season closer.
Yep.
Right, and you might have a couple of games before the first game, and you might have a couple after, weather dependent. But on this date, the season officially starts with a big event. On this date, the season closes with this big event.
Yep, definitely.
And I think it's a good way for us to get that community engaged and get them to work towards stuff, but also to uh, organize themselves a little bit. You know what I mean?
For
Like
sure.
be like, "Oh, I know that at the end of October there's going to be, you know, Operation Spooky Refuge or whatever that happens around Halloween or whatever we want to. It's not. We're not going to call it that. But you know what I mean. And so you can then prep and think about that. It's like, "Oh, what am I going to do for that game? And are we going to
Yeah, well, you can.
run some of our missions during the year to see how they work out, right? And see, is that the kind of thing we want to
Yeah,
do?"
and you can. It gives people a reason to think about. Okay, like, what do I want to do with my kit between now and the end of the season? Because I know there's going to be another longer game. Right? That gives you a timeline for. Oh, maybe I should get a radio. Maybe I need more mags.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Um, so it gives people a experience of a different way to play. It gives people different things to think about, and that's basically mission accomplished for us, I think. Right? People had
So
fun.
in thinking, yeah, and so in thinking about the game, like I want to ask you, like what is the one memory or experience or whatever that you're going to carry forward, like the one that really stands out for
uh,
you from that event?
definitely losing my mind while I'm behind a building while Jeremy's just
Yeah.
lifing 2/3 of an enemy of one of the teams. It's just like, just I have not
So aside from
I have
that
not
one,
laughed
what
that
would be
hard
your
in
second one
ages.
then?
Um, I think so. Very early in the day, once Red had made contact with us, so I guess probably around like 10:30, three Red players start like wandering through the village, and they're carrying these like foam carrot looking things. So I'm just like, what? What are those? And they've been allowed into the village by Karoo through our other checkpoint with a like orange pool noodle piece hot glued to like a little dowel wrapped in green with non-lethal around it, because he'd taken their weapons but they'd wanted something to defend themselves with. And I'm just like, we have guns, right? Like, just
That's so
amazing.
funny.
And subsequently, like throughout the day, when he needed to like herd players from either team, Crew was just carrying one of those around and beating people with it. It's just
There's so
like,
many fun photos of him with
I was
those.
just
Yeah.
like, this is amazing. Like, just that is probably the best $5 that was spent for props for this, and just we had no idea.
Yeah, and I had no idea he'd made them
Yeah,
either.
no, he
Like
just showed
he
up with them
just
day
showed up.
of and was like, I had
Yeah,
this silly idea. It's like, yes.
perfect. Yeah, he also made those propaganda like flyers and
Those were
posters, which
wicked.
are like so funny. And like how the teams used them was so clever. Like they just came up and just gave them all to one player. It's like, what am I supposed to do with these? As opposed to using them like a leaflet, and try and role playing a little bit more. And I think Blue was probably a little bit more sensible with their application. But anyways, it's some of those are still, I think, pretty much stapled
Oh
on.
yeah,
We were
absolutely. I mean, they're
there
going to be
on
there for
Saturday,
ages,
and
right? Like,
yeah,
um, I also really enjoyed. So one of the like running jokes and all the role playing stuff is that basically this guy's made drugs out of mushrooms.
yeah,
And so partway through the like evening beforehand, when we're like trying to set up stuff and just like spray painting graffiti onto the cardboard we've put up, um, Steph's like, so we're like, we mushroom cultists. I'm like, we are now. And so there's a giant like 6 foot section of board that I just had, like spray painted with like praise the great shroom or something analogous. That
yeah. The Fungus
the
Among
fungus
Us, I
among us,
think,
yeah,
is
that's the
another
one.
one.
That Fong thought was sufficiently good to make a photo of. And it was just like, really for me, like the role playing, the emergent gameplay are the things I chalk up as successes, but the dumbassery is the stuff that I find fun.
Yeah, I think overall too. Just I think there was some effective, like tactical play that occurred,
Definitely.
but I think the where there is the most opportunity is on strategic play, right? I think there was not, and if you understand the difference between strategy and tactics, right? Like both commanders were given opportunities to try and devise and apply a strategy, and I think in future games and when we think about how we want to lay out the field and stuff, that's the part that we're going to have to tackle the most,
Yeah.
because if we want commanders to be strategic, they need to be given not clear direction, but the field needs to support that. And ultimately, most of the fighting occurred around one bottleneck for like 4 out of the 6 hours, which doesn't really lead to a lot of strategic opportunities. So just something for us to think about. But still, like really, really strong efforts by all the players. And I think there was fighting basically all day. Like I don't think there were any moments where people were not exchanging fire in some way, trying to take one of the capture points, which at least one of them,
Yeah, no, I
right?
don't think there were any
Um,
real like lulls in
yeah,
the action. Um, you know, and like, despite, to be honest, my efforts to create them by stealing with team leaders, just to be like, all right, so how well have you organized your teams for the next 20 minutes? I want to see what they're going to do when you leave them unattended.
yeah, yeah, totally. But yeah, overall, just really thrilled about the game. I had a great time. To be honest with you, like I'm glad that it's over from an organization standpoint because it was a lot. But it's the kind of thing that once you finish that project, it sort of leaves a bit of a little bit of a void that you're going to try and fill. And I'm looking forward to seeing what we're gonna come up with over the next couple of months for the end of the year one. But I'm also excited to play. I still haven't played airsoft meaningfully. Like, I mean, I was at this event, but I didn't play. Obviously, I fired my gun 5 times, never at anybody in particular. So it'll be fun to start the season for real now. So
Yeah.
I'm,
Yes.
but
We
I
want
think it's a
to
good memory for a
blast out
lot
some
of them.
plasto.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, thanks, Pat, for this conversation and reminiscing. We are, I say we, but thanks to Jason's amazing drone video footage as well as his video that he took during the game, and my GoPro basically running off a power bank and running all day long. We've got some footage from the day, and so I'm going to be putting together like a chronological sort of recap of the day using some of that footage to talk about what was happening at any given time, what the teams were doing, etc., and to showcase. I think I have at least a couple of clips of Jeremy just being foolish,
Good.
and some of the other villagers too, so we can
Excellent. That
get
needs
some
to
of
be
that.
recorded for posterity.
Yeah. And so to be able to share it. So for those of you who are listening, if you want to see that video, it's going to be posted in the next little while on our YouTube channel. If you're not watching this on YouTube, if you're listening on Spotify, and the link to all that is going to be the link to our channel and everything is in the description. The video is going to be on the main channel, so you won't have to dig for it. But until then, that's really all we have for you this week. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.